For a second there, I was waiting. I'm like, what am I supposed to do next? I
Yeah,
don't remember.
what's my next?
What's going on? We are in Hebrews chapter 8. Wait, no, chapter 7. We haven't hit chapter 8 yet. So if you want to move there, and we're still talking about we're starting to shift. So we were talking a lot about Melchizedek and that priestly order that Jesus is a part of. Um, we started to shift a little bit by contrasting Jesus to the Aaronic priests, and now we're going to really get into just why Jesus is better as a priest than the other priests that the Jews would have been used to. So this is a good section. I'm liking it, and so we're going to be talking about this for a little bit, and then we'll be moving on. Just to give us some context, we are going to start in verse 26, but I feel like starting there is just it just doesn't seem right. So let's read from verse 20. Um, Actually, let's read 20 through 25 first, and then we'll read 26 through 28. So let's see. Uh, Sean, would you read 20 through 25? And then John, would you read 26 through 28?
Okay. Um, and inasmuch as it was not without an oath, for they indeed became priests without an oath, for he with an oath through the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. So much the more also Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant. The former priest, on the one hand, existed in greater numbers because they were prevented by death from continuing. But Jesus, on the other hand, because he continues forever, holds his priesthood permanently. Therefore, he is able also to save forever those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them.
For such an high priest became us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens, who needeth not daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifice, first for his own sins, and then for the people's. For this he did once, when he offered up himself. For the law maketh men high priests which have infirmity, but the word of the oath, which was since the law, maketh the Son, who is consecrated for evermore.
So last week we talked a bit about how the one of the big differences between Jesus as priest and the children of Aaron as priest, in that Jesus is a priest because God made him priest and declared an oath and said, I'm going to make you a priest. He was chosen, he was decreed, he was acceptable to God. Whereas the Aaronic priesthoods, they were priests because their parents were priests, because their father was a priest. And since Aaron was the priest and it was passed down through his sons, they were priests. And that was the requirement for them to become a priest. They didn't have to be, they didn't have to know God. They didn't have to, follow his statutes. They really, that was the requirement. They just needed to be born of the right thing. And so you could end up with priests that were great, and you could end up with priests that were terrible. And actually, through the Bible, we see examples of both of that. But Jesus is different. God said, no, I'm going to make him the priest. He is the great one. He's the one who is acceptable. And so he makes Jesus a priest. So we talked about a bit about that last week and the difference there between that. But so this is cool. But we're gonna start in verse 26 and just look at some of these things about Jesus, which are pretty cool here. He says, for such a high priest was fitting for us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and has become higher than the heavens. So he's contrasting Jesus right now with the earthly priests, with the Aaronic priest, and he's saying, here's some differences between Jesus and them, and here's the list, or at least some of the list. Jesus is holy. And I like that. This idea of holy, this is one of my favorite topics, the whole idea that God is holy. It's there's these s- such this good nuances around this word. And a lot of times when we think of holy, we think of church or we think of religious or all of that. But really, when we get down to the root of holy, it is something that is special and that is separate. It is something that is different from everything else, that is unique. And that describes not only Jesus, but it describes God. And I love this because I think this may be one of God's primary attributes is that he is holy. He is just completely different than what we understand. But here we're keeping it down to Jesus, and I know that's confusing because Jesus is God, but Jesus is also holy. He is different, and the opposite of holy would be common or profane. And so here's this picture. We have lots and lots of priests from the children of Aaron. They're common. There's lots of them. And that's one of the points that this author is making out. There's lots of them. But with Jesus, he's the only one, and there's none after him. Once he becomes the priest, the high priest, that's it. There's no need for anything else. He's different than all of them. I don't know. What do you guys think of when you think of Jesus being holy?
I just I think of how perfect he must have been. There's a woman that I know named Sandy Chin Tavis who is the nicest, kindest person I've ever met in my life, and I cannot think of anything she's done bad or wrong for the life of me. She said that one time when she was a kid, they smoked a cigarette. But other than that, I can't think of anything she's ever done bad. And I know that she is not anywhere near as perfect and holy as Jesus. And so I've got Sandy up here on this pedestal, and Jesus is so much higher than it. I can't fathom how perfect he must have been, just on a different level than anybody else.
I mean, not even to have a bad thought. I mean, that is such a high pedestal.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it also points to us and shows us that we really don't understand Jesus, right? He understands us, but he's so different than us that we understand him. I don't know the right way of saying it. We understand him peripherally. We understand who he is, but we don't understand the way he thinks or the way he. And I'm not even saying any of this right. It's just he's
Right.
just so different. It's incredible.
Don't want to jump ahead, but when they talk about the priests that had to make the sacrifice first for their own sins and then for the people's, Jesus didn't even have to do that. He just put himself up once for everybody,
Yeah.
and it was a one and done thing. It's just so awesome. So awesome individual.
And this is why God said he made an oath, right? That Jesus gets to be the priest because he's acceptable. He gets to come into the presence of God. He doesn't have to atone for sin. He's not part of this man's rebellion that we have. And so he gets to go into the presence of the high and lifted up one. It's incredible. All right.
Well, yeah, I'll say these are awkward phrases for me just to infuse here that
Okay.
the concept of Jesus being made higher when he's already God is a difficult trip for me in this Trinity. If I were to read this in isolation, I might be inclined to the Jehovah Witness way. If you know, and I'm just simply expressing.
Yeah.
If you extract verses out of context,
Sure.
there's a good amount of this in Hebrew that he was made higher.
Yeah.
He already was, and they don't say instead that he returned to his position, and that one's a hard one still for me.
Well,
And go ahead.
but we need to think in the context of him being human also. because he became a high priest because he became human. He was God. He didn't have to become a high priest, but when he became human and was like us, and he was holy, that's the distinction. Is I love in the Bible where you look at the word, especially in the New Testament, it talks about there's two ways of describing Jesus Christ, and that's Christ Jesus and Jesus Christ. When you see Christ Jesus in the Bible, and you're talking about his godliness. And when you see Jesus Christ in the Bible, it's talking about his humanness. And right here, we're talking about his humanness being holy and innocent and blameless and all those other things that are describing him as the high priest because he was human. The high priest was always human. It wasn't some other thing. It was someone that interceded for the people or for us to God. And that's what made Jesus this a perfect example of being holy, because he was all these other descriptions that we just read here.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
there,
And its return might give a different connotation. So
Yeah.
I'll
It's
noodle
true.
on that. I think that's nice.
and there's this also, we were told previously in Hebrews, when we were talking about how Jesus was man, there was this one aspect of it, which was he couldn't be high priest if he wasn't man. If he was just God, he couldn't be a proper mediator. He would just be on the God side of mediation. And the whole idea that he had to become man puts him in this special place where he can mediate between both God and man, because he's not stuck on either side. He's actually a part of both sides, and it makes him this perfect mediator. But also, if we want to look at these passages that talk like this one that say he became higher than the heavens, then really what we also need to do is look at the other passages that talk about how he descended and humbled himself as well,
Mhm.
because he did have to do that. And if he also descended, then he also ascended. And there's some of the confusion that you can have if you skip the descended part.
Yeah.
And I know this is what you're talking about, Eric. I know, but it's just an amazing aspect of him, um, that he became man to do all of this for us. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I can grok. Yeah, and that one I love contemplating just how much he did for us in that respect.
Yeah,
The language, yeah, and I
I
would
understand.
repeat.
Yeah, I understand. And there's,
Mhm.
yeah, never mind. Let's
No,
move
no,
on.
good stuff. Thank you. And I like that was nice.
So we looked at he is holy, but the next word, mine says harmless. I think somebody said something else, but I'm just curious. What do you think it means when it says that Jesus is harmless? So mine, it says he is holy, harmless, undefiled. What do you think it means when it says he's
I like
harmless?
that.
My version says innocent.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
I
like
think
that.
that resonates better
And
for
so
me.
I'm Innocuous is unharmful. So harmless it's between harmless and innocent. So my apologies.
No,
Yeah,
this is all good. But it's not that he's not dangerous or powerful,
Mhm.
right? It's that he's not after his own, he's not petty. He's not has this guile inside of him where he's trying to manipulate things in a way to harm other people. He's actually, his plan is to bring people to know him. And so, but it's just an interesting term that they use in mine, and I like that some of yours says innocent. That is probably better. It also says he's undefiled, and
I,
again,
I I'm
oh, go
I'm
ahead.
gonna emphasize I like the unharmful as well. I mean, that's why I like the word I'm reading here.
Okay,
It's
wait, yours says unharmful.
well, I'm reading the Latin, sorry, since we're going slow enough where I can do that.
Gotcha,
And the
gotcha.
word, it lies in between. It implies an interaction. You can
Yeah,
be isolated and inactive and just a purely passive lamb, but he wasn't.
Right.
He was an active
but he's
lamb,
not.
and
Yeah.
he interacted, and so sorry, it's a subtlety that I think is extra poetically
No,
beautiful.
it's good. It's good. And so we also are talking about undefiled, and John brought this up, how because he's without sin, he's undefiled, he's not part of this rebellion that man has. He's righteous. He is acceptable by God, and this distinction, the author hits more than one time, because because he is. I forgot where I was going with this. Sorry. Oh, because he has access to the Holy of Holies. He has access to God. He doesn't need to go through the ceremony of atonement for himself. He doesn't need to go through the sacrifices and here the author mentions daily sacrifices, but we know even daily sacrifices probably not enough. They're going to do the sacrifice, and then they're going to go into the Holy of Holies. And it really needs to happen kind of like that quickly, right? Because we can sin really, really quick. But Jesus doesn't have that issue. He's not having to sacrifice for himself. He has access to God the Father.
The high priest only one day a year
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
so Jesus is with God 24/7.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a big distinction, and the author's going to bring this up in chapter 8, like the first verse. We're gonna get into that, but it's a big important distinction, right? That again, the high priest. Well, and even then, it's not the priests that get to go into the Holy of Holies and have this theoretical access with God, because really, the temple comes from the tabernacle, and this whole concept was this was a meeting place for God and man. And this was a place where God would come to earth and meet with man. And it was in this Holy of Holies that the presence of God, excuse me, would be. And the high priest could go in there and meet with him one time a year. But that was, again, only if God came and met with the high priest. And from what we see in history, that was not frequent. It happened a lot with Moses, but it didn't happen very frequently. We see it with Solomon, where the Shekinah glory is coming from the Holy of Holies, but it's not something that was every single day. And so that there wasn't this immediate type of access that man had with God through this law, through the Mosaic law. But it's completely shifted now with Jesus, where he has full access to God. It's a pretty
So,
incredible thing.
so um, can we like do a reset just for a second? So I got Bill 7:24 with God, but there was a moment, and we just experienced it last weekend, right? Where Jesus was separated,
That's
you
true.
know,
Yeah.
and that, anyways, it's always interesting to me trying to understand, forsaken by God. Why have you forsaken me on the cross? We know he descended. I don't know if you guys ever think about it, what was, I always try to understand that I know he conquered death through his sacrifice, but that whole descending, that whole God, he was separated from God. It always to me is kind of interesting. You know what I mean? Have you guys thought about it?
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, what does it mean that he descend? What did it mean that he had to be separated? What did
Yeah.
he just
Yeah.
pull out the fisticuffs and said, "Okay, I'm gonna take you down," right? Wrestling like Jacob, he wrestled with
Yeah.
Satan in the hole. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just always, and I think that's one of those things that, you know, people grapple with themselves, right? And especially if you're not a believer, this is kind of wild. You know what I'm saying? It just, anyways, but I think there's some significance in that
Yeah.
separation, and that, you know, what did it mean? You know what I mean? That's, I guess.
Well, let's look at verse 27 because I think this speaks of this. And it says, who did not need daily as the high priest to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins and then for his people's. For this he did once for all when he offered up himself. And this is the incredible aspect. I'm convinced that when Jesus is at the Garden of Gethsemane and he is saying, let this cup pass from me, this is the aspect that he's talking about. It's not as much the cross, although I don't want to discount that. That is a big deal. But it for him, it can't be as big of a deal as the fact that he is taking the sin of the world
Mhm.
on himself, and he's doing it in such a way that because he's got this sin, he's separated from God.
Mhm.
And that's an incredible thing. Our sin separates us from God, but it also separated God from God. It also separated Jesus from God because he was
Mhm.
willing to take that sin upon himself.
And
Understanding it,
yeah.
I don't have the ability to understand this. This is
No,
an incredible
but
thing, but he was willing to
thinking of
do it.
yeah, but thinking about it a little bit more, the one thing that he had, we just talked about it, that he had as a person, as in flesh. The flesh part is his flesh was never corrupted. He was innocent. He was blameless in his flesh, right? Whereas we are all convicted because of our flesh, yet he was innocent and blameless, right?
Yeah.
And that was his power over Satan in the whole, right? I mean, think about
Yeah.
it, right? Because
I-
Satan has something over all of us, right? Because of our sinful flesh, right? But Jesus was blameless and innocent. We just read it, right, in
Yeah.
Hebrews.
Yeah.
And so being even separated from God, he was innocent and blameless. He was still different than everyone else. And he
Absolutely.
could stand up on his own against the dark side because the dark side had nothing over him. Anyways, it's something, and we could talk about this forever. It's one of those awesome, it's high on my list of things to discuss when I go to my reward.
The when I think about the separation from God, I look at how when Jesus started his ministry, he went into the desert, but it says he was led by the Spirit, which is God also. And I think that's where he was in constant communion with God the Father through the Spirit. And I think when we talk about the separation, this is just my pea little brain trying to wrap around what you're talking about, because we're probably never going to understand it. But I believe the Spirit, the Holy Spirit left him at that time,
Mm.
which he was constantly in contact with God the Father. And I think that's when God the Father and the Holy Spirit turned their back on Christ, the human being, and that was not present anymore. And I think that's what we're talking about when it says that he was, he was left, he was isolated from God. And I think that's really and then on the resurrection, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit came back again. And that's how his physical body was resurrected. But it was a different physical body as he walks through walls and does all that other stuff. So I think that's the only way my pea brain can get around it, is that there are three of them, and the Holy Spirit is what was guiding the human flesh of Jesus Christ on the cross.
Yeah.
Sean, to piggyback on what you just said, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've lost both of my parents, and I lost my dad at a young age, and what that did to me. And my dad was there my entire life. My mom was there my entire life, and then in a split second, they were gone. And how that affected me, Jesus was in constant communication with the Holy Spirit and God since eternity. I mean, so there's no begin. I only had 17 years with my father, and I was I was blessed with 17 years with my father, and then I was blessed with 40 years with my mother. And how I've never gotten over those two things. But man, God, totally. I mean, since for eternity, and in a split second,
Yeah.
they left, and that to me is just amazing. In a sense of like, yeah, that's crushing. Just even from my own personal experience. So for his experience, I don't even know how to quantify that.
One thing
Oh,
that
that
is
was
worth,
beautiful. Just
yeah, I was gonna say one thing that's worth pointing out is because of all that we're talking about, this is why he's such a great mediator, right? Because he has been both on the side of being separated from God and being perfectly united from God, or united with God. And so he can understand us. We can't look at Jesus and say, "Man, you don't understand us." And he's like, "No, I took your sin. I took that and I separated myself from God for you. I understand you." And that's it puts him in this perfect position of being this priest that no other person can. The Aaronic priests, they never had this issue because they were always separated from God to some degree, right? They've never had full access with God. So it's this is all just this what we've been discussing just talks about how great of a priest he really is because he has done all of this.
I just
All right.
want to mention one thing. When you say ironic prince, I keep hearing that
Ironic.
ironic,
I'll say
the ironic priest. Yes, I think
I'll
that
say Levitical priest. I can't say Aaronic very well.
Yeah.
One last thing before we move on. We actually haven't talked about two of them, but I want to just point out, separate from sinners. This is really incredible that Jesus is separate from sinners. And I just want to point this out because we are all born into this rebellion of what Adam did, right? We're just born into it. We are part of Adam's rebellion against God. Jesus was also born into this rebellion. He also comes as a descendant of Adam, but he never participated in the rebellion. And that's different than all of us. And so I like that. He is separate from sinners. He's different than all of us because of this aspect of him. And this is I just want to, this is worth bringing up. We're all born into it. He's born into it, and yet he didn't participate. That's
Well,
something.
I think he even also, the conception was different than the rest of us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The
Oh no,
holy,
it was.
yeah, right. I mean, it was, so yeah, it's different.
It was different, but as the author of Hebrew points out, it points to the fact that he is man, right?
Hmm.
His genealogy goes through Adam. He is a man, and
Yeah.
also because it's different, his genealogy goes through God, and so he's God, and so there's this cool aspect of it. But it's worth pointing out that he is separate from sinners, from us who've rebelled against God, and although he was born into the family that we have, so it's pretty interesting.
One
So
one
I
thing I
like
want to bring up is that what we teach the students here, at least the guys, is that the important part here was who his father was, who Jesus' father was.
Yeah.
And we as fathers need to be a good example and be a part of our kids' lives. And that's one of the things that is really important about, yes, he was born in a half sinful, but it was his father's influence that guided us. And I take that to heart for me as a father, as taking care of my kids, is I need to be a part of their lives and I need to be truly engaged in that. So just a little side.
That's a good point. And we see in our world what happens when you don't have a good father or when you don't have a father, right? I mean, statistically, bad things are going to happen if you don't have a father. And so it's an important aspect.
I was just thinking about how I think in Doug's version it says innocent as opposed to harmless, and Jesus did not do anything to deserve what he got. But then I think if Jesus had some kids, we'll see if he would have had some of them negative thoughts that we all have. So we'll see.
Well, he had us and we're his kids.
We're grown up and can be reasonable and still irrational. That might be worse than kids. All right. And then the last phrase on verse 26, he and has become higher than the heavens. And this is something also we don't want to miss. And Eric brought up some of the cool aspects of this. But what we don't want to miss is that means Jesus is God, right? This is saying he became higher than the heavens. There's nothing higher than the heavens except for the one who created the heavens. And that's where it's elevating him. He is not just in the heavens, he is higher than the heavens. And so it's elevating him to a position where not only is he our priest, not only is he all of these things, but he has full power and authority. So it's not just a name of being priest. He's actually in that position of being God. So it's no other priests can say this. There's no other priest that could say they are higher than the heavens, that have become higher than the heavens. And so again, there's this contrast between Jesus as priest versus the Levitical priest. See how I switched that up there for Sean.
Hey, John, my version says exalted above the heavens. And it just
Oh,
like,
amen. I like it.
it just that I just love that.
Such a good picture. Okay, so we talked about this. We talked about verse 27. Let's see. I think we've talked about verse 28 too. For the law appoints as high priests men who have weakness, but the word of the oath which came after the law appoints the Son who has been perfected forever. And this is one of those verses that could be taken out of context where you could say, oh, look, he's becoming perfected forever. He wasn't perfect. But that's not what this is saying. This is proof of his perfection. That's what it means to be perfected here. It is the evidence that we can see that he is perfect. And that's what they're saying here. He was the Son of God who has become perfected. And that, again, it's a test. There's a test that's applied and it's shown that he's perfect. And so it wasn't that there was a change in who he is. It's just that the test revealed who he is.
And it's so great and thankful that it is the case, because you can't be in God's presence unless you are perfected,
Yeah.
right? You can't, you would burn up, whatever, right? And so God looks at us, he sees Jesus, right? We inherit all of his perfection, which is just amazing. And one of those things I think people really struggle to understand when you're coming from the world. Very different concept. And it's like we don't understand his holiness, right? And we don't have to understand it, because we are perfected through Jesus. So we inherit that holiness.
I like
It's
that. That's
awesome.
interesting.
You know,
Inherited. Yeah.
Moses couldn't be, you know, he could just see the God could walk by him, but he couldn't look at him, right?
Just the
And that
glory passing
holiness
by him, yeah.
dwelt on him, right? I always, when I think of holiness, I think of that he had this shine, you know what I mean? He had this glowing that never left him after that, right? And just, it's, yeah, one of those hard to comprehend things.
There is another aspect that this is stimulating me is that it doesn't say his spirit ascended. It's the
Yeah.
man himself ascended. And that's the contemplation of heaven, even. It's not like he left his body behind. That's part of it. And here
Yeah.
we have a flesh. Yeah, it's just obviously I'm spinning here, but it's a different concept than simply saying, oh, he became spirit and ascended to heaven, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
His flesh in a manner was truly resurrected, not to die
And
again. And that's a different aspect of this that I'll be folding into my thoughts, as Doug was saying.
this is there would be a danger in saying it was his spirit who is at heaven, because then you could start talking about, well, does that mean he resurrected? What does resurrection mean, right?
Mhm.
And what the Bible is pointing out is that he truly resurrected from the dead. He truly came back to life, and he was fully himself, and then ascended. And so there's this picture of Jesus who truly has conquered death in a way that is unrecognizable in throughout history. He did it in a manner that you can't throw words around it and try to discount it, because he really did resurrect from the dead. It's a good thing.
And what's amazing is that we will all be resurrected.
Be resurrected. Yeah.
And have this body without the burden of the flesh of this world that we've had, what we have right now, right? That's mind blowing, right? To really, it's hard to even think of how that will be, but
I don't even know
know,
what it means.
right? But it's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always think about those who are cremated. How God's
Yeah.
going to do that, right? And they spread
Yeah.
their ashes. God's going to
Yeah.
bring those ashes back together.
There's
That's
this
going to be amazing.
interesting passage in Isaiah,
Yeah.
and I can't remember the exact words, but it sounds like he's gonna bring the dust back together
Yeah.
to resurrect us.
Yeah.
But what does that even mean? Because the atoms that are in my body are not the same that were the atoms that were in my body 10 years ago.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
don't understand it. I don't know what this means. I'm excited for it. It sounds like it's going to be pretty neat, but I don't know what it means.
Well, with God, all things are possible.
Absolutely. Well said.
Unless we want to, never mind.
Yeah.
Let's read verse 1 of chapter 8. It says, so now this is the main point of things we're saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and the true tabernacle which the Lord erected, not man. So here the author is getting to it, and he says, so it's clear, this is the main point. We have a high priest like this that he's been describing. Jesus is this high priest. And here's an important aspect which we've mentioned before. He is seated at the right hand of the throne of majesties in the heavens. Jesus himself is with God the Father right now. This puts him at a completely different level as a priest than any of the previous priests. They are not. They were not at the presence of the God. They were not at the right hand of God, right? They were on earth offering the sacrifices, and they had a potential access with God, but it's nothing like what Jesus has, where he is right now in the heavens at the right hand of the throne of majesty. It's an incredible aspect of Jesus. He's right there. And then I love verse 2. A minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord erected, and not man. So here's the main point that he's going to start bringing up, which is Jesus is the reality that everything was pointing to. There's all of these pictures that the law has. There's all of, and he'll talk more about this, all of the things that they built in the tabernacle. They were all pictures or shadows, as he'll describe later, of the reality, which is Jesus, who's in the real heavens, a temple that's created by the Lord himself. What do you think it means, a temple created by the Lord, that the Lord erected? What do you think it looks like?
I have no
It's
idea.
perfect. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I just think about the the architect of the temple is the architect of the universe and everything that's in it. That's that's like his that's his sample size. And
Yeah,
so now he needs to he gets the opportunity to just continue to architect something else. And it's like, okay, if the world and the universe and the elements that are in there was just something you were playing with and you did that only in 6 days, imagine what you could do now. Not that he's grown or anything, but I'm just saying, man, that's going to be pretty amazing.
Stands out to me in this is he's seated at the right hand.
Yeah.
It's like he's not working and his job is done already. Whereas the priests, there was no place for them to sit in the tabernacle because they were doing work inside there.
yeah.
And Jesus' mission is complete, and he's just sitting next to God and observing, basically, because he finished his work.
We have some ideas of what the temple would look like because God told Moses when they were building the temple, or he told, not Moses, yeah, when they were doing the tabernacle, build it like this, because this is a picture of the true temple. But the scale is completely different. When we read in Revelation where this temple comes down and we have a new earth and a new heaven, it is much smaller. So the scale is completely different, and the beauty is completely different. It's just it's incredible. At the time of this writing, the temple was called Herod's temple because Herod built it, which is really interesting, right? It's not the Jews that built it. It was the king of that area who built the temple. But here we're saying, he's pointing out, it's the Lord who erected the real temple. All of that is just pictures. And the idea of the temple was you would walk in and it would be so magnificent and so glorious. You'd be like, oh yeah, the Lord resides here. And yet it's just a shadow. It doesn't,
You know,
it's not reality.
we are exposed every day to his architectural amazing abilities. I like to fish and I have a boat, and I'll tell you, every August, at least last few years, I've been able to fish for tuna, and you're offshore 30, 40 miles. And I'll tell you, it's just amazing to be on the water and to be able to just sit back. We'd be trolling, fishing, and just, last summer it was getting towards sunset, and it's just amazing to just sit and look at the amazing creation that God did. in this world, and we experience it every day wherever we are. You can't not open your eyes and see all of the results and the things of his creation, what he does every day. It renews. It's just amazing. So his tabernacle, whatever, is just going to be indescribably amazing, right? It'll be just like seeing that amazing sunset that you've seen happen, but every time it's totally different because of just the power and eminence of his creation. So it's pretty wild. It'll be, along with having that body in heaven, it'll be great to experience that whole thing and see it all.
I'm looking forward to it. So I got a weird question. When do you think this temple was created? When do you think it was erected? If the Lord erected it? I'm just curious.
I'm when it comes to imagining heaven, I stop. I just unable, and I'm trying to reconcile even the temple described in Revelation. That okay, these are things that men value, all the
Yeah.
jewels and preciousness and things, and I have difficulty sitting in a place trying to envision it, because it just seems to me an analogy to what's real and allegorical. It's whenever there's a scene of heaven. But when you made reference to Exodus, this is a shadow of that in heaven. And from there, it's okay. Mind is blown. I cannot reach that far. And contemplating heaven as a physical thing is especially difficult. And all I embrace is that it's in the presence of God. And that is what the tabernacle was, a place of gathering and being in the presence, or God being in the presence of men in that case. And that in itself is enough definition of heaven for me. Or even, well, I won't go into Revelation. Just everything else is mind-boggling. But it is these hints that there's a physical aspect to it that is interesting, and because we can't imagine. All I could imagine is non-physical. Okay, it just blow physical out, and just okay, it's in the mind, and it's spiritual, but it's not quite that. It's not. There's an existence here that's very real, and it's not just a bunch of floating, disembodied things, so to speak.
So I have a question.
When I think of when, you asked the question, when was the temple or the tabernacle built? And my thoughts go to that. It says that all things were created. So he spoke and the world was everything was done. He knew exactly what was going to happen, and it was done. And that's when I believe the tabernacle was done, because God had this thing that said he could give to Moses, and he could say, here's what it's supposed to look like, because this is what it is. This is what it looks like here.
Yeah.
In the here and now. So to me, he spoke, and the tabernacle, the New Jerusalem, all those things were created at one time. So
in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Right?
But did he need it did he need that before sin? Because in the Garden of Eden, he was fellowshipping with man on a daily basis. He was with us on earth. So we weren't separated. We didn't need a place of fellowship with him.
he didn't.
I think that's a good comment.
He didn't need anything but he wanted us.
Yeah.
And so he didn't need the temple, but he wanted us. And he also created all things so that we could be with him. So to me, it's what he wanted, not what he needed, because he doesn't really even
Yes,
need it.
but I mean, we were in a position to be with him on a daily basis before sin.
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
everything changed after that.
Yeah, and I think the phrase "before the beginning" matters to me. The eternity before creation. God didn't need it. It's not the tabernacle to me is also part and parcel to creation, not some place that we were invited into and rejected. It's just I think it wasn't. The notion of a tabernacle is God and something else existing in the presence of God, and that's creation. So beyond that, nonsense.
I just wanted, you mentioned Eric, that that a lot of the ornate aspect of the temple are things that man values. And I think it's interesting that when he gives them instructions on building the tabernacle and then later building the temple, he tells them to do designs, but they're often of designs of things that are not man-made, and he has them do designs of almonds and pomegranates and flowers and branches and things like that, which I think gives this aspect of that when we go and see this temple, it's going to be real. It's going to be, we're going to look at it and we're not going to think, oh man, some guy built this great thing. It's going to be, this is something that man can't build. These are, this is God made, clearly God made. When he makes, and I wonder if it's interesting, he talks about the lampstands and he talks about the bowls and everything, and they're in the shape of almond blossoms and all of these. I wonder if when we get there, we're going to see that that's exactly what it looks like. There are these flowers that are the bowls, right? And it's just really interesting. I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to see how God designs things like this. But I think it's maybe we start to value some of these things because we see that God did it and God valued it. But I don't know. It's just
I like that.
interesting.
You want to see the bowls? I want to see the cherubim.
Well, I suspect those won't be gold. I suspect those will be real cherubim that'll be in there. But yeah, it's all incredible. We are out of time, so
Oh my.
we're gonna have to stop here. But this has been a great discussion. I'm looking forward to this. And again, the point that he's bringing up here is that Jesus is our high priest. He is better than any of the Levitical priests. He is better than all of that in so many different ways and so many different aspects that if we have to choose between the Levitical priest following the Mosaic law and Jesus and this new covenant, which we'll talk about next week, it should be clear. It should be clear that why would we go to that old shadow when we can have the real thing? And so this is where we're going to keep
Well,
going for the
and if
next
I
few
might,
weeks.
the analogy of the shadow, the difference between a shadow and the real thing is unimaginable.
It is.
So I
And
like
actually,
that.
if you will, I was going to mention something and I just realized, but we're out of time. So if you give me just 30 more seconds, this Monday, there's supposed to be an eclipse. And if you're in particular parts, it'll be a total eclipse. If not, then you'll see part of it. It's not safe to look at the sun during this time. Please don't do that because you can go blind because it's dangerous. So one of the safe ways that you do this is you build like a pinhole camera. You poke a hole in a box and then you can see the light and you see the shadow on the thing. And so you look at the sun by looking at the shadow because that's a safe way to look at it. And I think this is what we're going to see when we start looking at the law. Is it's a safe way to look at the character of God without looking directly at him. Because if you get too close to him, it's dangerous, right? You can go blind by looking at the glory of God, probably more than go blind. But that's this whole thing. And so we're gonna look at the shadow, and it reveals something, but it's not anywhere near the real thing. And so that I'm excited about that discussion as we get there, probably next week.